Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Data Exchange Podcast. Today, we have a very exciting guest, Peter Long from MCH Data. How are you, Peter?
Great. I'm happy to be here. Really excited to participate in this. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, we're excited. MCH is a data company that's lasted over a century. Can you tell us a little bit about how a company in the data space just stays live and kicking for as long as you guys have?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, really. We're one of the few remaining companies. Will be 100 years old in 2028. My grandfather started the company. He was a professor of education at New York University. Kind of a little interesting side fact. He fought in World War I, knew Harry Truman, was part of the Truman administration. He did the Highway Safety Council. And our family joke is he was the inventor of the holiday death statistics. When say so many people are, killed over Thanksgiving vacation, trying to, encourage seatbelt use and some different things. But he was a professor of education at New York University, and he created a professional journal sort of back in the day, what we would maybe consider a blog or a training thing. But back then, schools across the country would send in articles, principals, superintendents across the country of things that they were doing that were working, and they would share that information. And he published the journal and then would mail it out across the country to all the schools. He had a database of all the schools and subscribers. The journal at one point in time was one of the most respected journals in existence. We ended up selling it to Fairleigh Dickinson University for $1 just to keep it going way back when. But obviously, with so many channels to get information out along those lines, that whole industry changed too. But it was quite expensive to put a journal out, print it, and ship it out all the way across the country for people to read. He was out of Rockefeller Center in New York City, so the company started in Rockefeller Center. But he actually printed the journal and mailed it out of Sweet Springs, Missouri, which is about an hour outside of Kansas City, which we reside today. And he had family members out there, hence how he knew Harry Truman, who was from Independence, Missouri. So Sweet Springs is just a few miles down the road. And people began to reach out to him and wanted to use his subscriber list to send out marketing literature or to, get information out. So we became the first list or, marketing company in the country. It's certainly for education, and we were going back in the days when you use typograph machines and addressagraphs. For those people that aren't as old as I am or whatever, but the typograph machine, you would type out a dog tag, literally, a metal dog tag, and it would go in a sleeve, and you would put all these dog tags into a sleeve and stick them into what's called an addressograph machine, which would ink the dog tag and then stamp it on the mail piece. So when you wanted to send something out from a marketing perspective, you had to get it printed and trucked out here to Sweet Springs. It would go into the things. The list never left the building because it was all on dog tags and in giant filing cabinets, and, it was all processed that way. But he was very innovative. My grandfather was one of the first people to use a computer back in the 60s and, automated the stuff, put it on computer. It moved to Cheshire labels and peel and stick labels, and then ultimately to CD-ROM, DVDs. Well, actually, it went to mag tapes, where we would send mag tapes out to data processing centers, and to CD-ROMs. And that, now, of course, it all just gets zipped up in a file and sent out. So, the data side has just really changed. We sold our mail shop back in the early noughts, 2002, 3, 4, whatever. We had a big mail shop. We would process all the mail here, but we sold that, and we invested in cloud architecture and a lot of different things. So we've done a lot of pivots over the years, and I'm the third generation. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting life. Yeah.
That's amazing. From dog tags to CD-ROMs to flat files, it kind of takes us into what's happening now, right? How do you feel like AI is reshaping data and marketing, and where does MCH fit?
Yeah, a wonderful question. We see AI as a huge opportunity. We're a smaller company, and I think anybody listening to this podcast that has a smaller company, AI is just going to allow you to punch above your fighting weight. So where you used to have data scientists, IT people, everything involved in trying to utilize or maximize the use of data, you now just have it at your fingertips in your own computer. A subscription to ChatGPT or Claude or any of the others. And, you've got a data scientist in there, you've got an English teacher, you creative writer, you've got PowerPoint maker, just almost anything you can think of right at your fingertips. And if you empower the data through AI, you can just get in, quantum leaps in productivity or usage of the data for, proper uses, creating custom models, answering questions about the market, sizing the markets, pulling lists out, more targeted campaigns, everything. So from a data provider standpoint, we see this as a huge opportunity. You know, in the old days, a lot of times the IT departments at companies were kind of our nemesis. They were always overloaded. They had a lot of projects. And when you wanted to really try to empower data that came from our, solutions, you kind of need to involve your IT departments, and they would be a little bit of the thorn in the side saying, well, we have 9 projects ahead of you. We'll get to it next year sometime. And, people would be like, well, no, thanks. Now you connect in a connector, go to AI, and the individual themselves can just empower themselves to do whatever they want. So, we're very excited about this. There's obviously opportunities on the compilation side too that help us with vibe coding and different things. So I spend probably half of my day every day just doing things in AI, using AI, studying AI, getting classes. We're neck deep into it, and we're very excited. And, it's the next big transition for us, and we see it having incredible opportunities. I know you and I have even talked about some co-ventures or some things that we may be able to do together, that I just think AI, just supercharges a lot of that. So it's just a very exciting time, honestly.
Absolutely. I completely agree. When we had spoke recently, you mentioned something that it stuck around, you said B to I. Business to institution. That's kind of MCH's lens on the education ecosystem. Can you dig in a little bit and tell the audience what you mean by B to I, business to institution?
Yeah, sure. This was, if I go back 25 years ago, we created a lot of catalogs that we sent out to the industry, and we sort of coined this phrase. So our company does a couple of other divisions. We have a healthcare division. We have an education, which we're going to talk about more specifically in this podcast, and some government data and things like that. And so when we would talk to customers and say, why do you use us? There's other providers out there, Dun& Bradstreet, other B2B, Info USA back in the day, now Data Axle and others that were Yellow Page compiled or Credit File compiled and a lot of other things. And they kept saying, well, you do this institution market really, really well. And it's very different. And so we sort of, pulled on that thread and realized we had a unique niche. The numbers that you're popping up here on the screen are kind of specific to education. But when you put all of our niches together, it's like a third of the gross domestic product of the U.S., healthcare, education, sort of. And when I say government spending, I'm talking about local government, not federal government, not the Department of Defense or whatever. That's kind of a little bit different thing, but city halls, county government, that type of thing. But, we realized that the job titles that people have, the functions that they roll are all different than what a typical business has. So, where you have vice president of sales, operations, IT, different things, you don't really have that in healthcare. You got doctors that have specialties, in schools, you have teachers that teach certain subjects and grades, that need to be specialized. And, the markets are very different. They're mission driven. They're not profit driven, lots of different things. So we really, the B to I really caught on, but then in the era of Google, everybody Googles a very specific thing, right? I mean, it's niche is the key in the world of Google, and nobody was searching for B to I because it was kind of a term that we made up. So it's a very real grouping, if you will. It was very hard to get it to catch on, industry wide where people would look for it. So we've gone back to being more specialized. We've always been specialized, but we've split these things out into their own divisions now, and we've kind of returned to, people are looking for education marketing, lots of different marketing. But I know your podcast audience may, because of the title of this podcast, there may be some people that specialize in educational marketing, or are true educational marketers in the K-12 educational marketing sense. And then there just may be B2B players that, and the education sector is a great sector. And you threw that slide up there, but I think that's very telling. It's a $1 trillion market. Even when you remove payroll, it's 310 billion. And, if you think of a typical school, first off, they're in every, county and city in America. So it's universal across America. There's 120,000 schools out there. There's 50 million kids approximately every day that go to school, and they eat lunch, they use sports, they play musical instruments, they, do plays and theater. And like, there's just so many things that a typical school buys that is not curriculum or necessarily technology or any of these other things. And so there's an huge ecosystem of companies that provide products into individual schools. And, if you think of it, there are still one classroom schools in Alaska with one teacher. And then there are, schools like in Berkeley, California, where Berkeley High School is, I think it's like 7,000 kids, maybe 5,000 kids. It's the size of some small towns in terms of just the spending. So the opportunities are pretty significant. And a lot of the B2B databases don't set you up properly. The number of employees is typically something people select. So you might think, well, okay, the number of teachers is important, but 250 teachers, that's a decent sized company, a 250 person company, but 250 teachers is a 5,000 student school, and 5,000 students, that's a really big company. That's like and they're there all day. They're using toilet paper. They're using everything else that you can think of. So there's just lots of opportunities, and targeting the right people in those groups and using the right messaging, the right timing. They have different fiscal year ends, everything. So we've kind of carved out this niche that has held true. And quite honestly, a lot of the big B2B database people utilize our stuff. We partner with them. I mean, it's just hard to do everything extremely well. And these segments are so important and so significant that, we've been able to carve out a niche and just do it a lot better than anybody else and benefit from it, basically.
Yeah, we work with a lot of foundational contact B2B data providers, and I've actually built some of those companies myself. And one of the things you'll find is you go look at the job title segments in a general B2B database. Like, you're not going to find provosts and all the other variations of job titles for schools and school districts, and it can be a huge challenge. Like, I've worked with so many customers that are just like, they go into one of these big deep B2B platforms, they're like, I just literally can't use this thing. I end up going to schools' websites or the district website and like mining the contacts myself. And so it is a real problem, I think, across the industry. And there's just not enough overlap or collaboration, it seems like. And I don't even think many of the marketers and salespeople out there even know that a database like this exists.
Yeah, just a little fun fact. There are over 200,000 ways to describe particular teacher job functions. So if you think of a grade 2 teacher, an algebra teacher, a geometry teacher, a French language teacher, you would think that there's actually like about 400 unique rolled up titles, if you will, of the various kinds of job functions that can exist at a school. But if you look at it, it's grade 2 teacher, second grade teacher, pod 2 teacher. There's just so many different ways. So when you grab job titles, for example, off of a school website, even just normalizing that data down to a standard function and making sure you're getting the right thing is a fairly sizable undertaking. And once again, the B2B guys, they just don't even attempt to do it. They just throw up teacher, maybe if they get it. So you get a whole bunch of teachers, but you don't know what they're teaching, what they're doing. It's not updated. We monitor 80,000 schools every month. So we go back and we update 4 million teachers and verify that they're still there, add new ones, delete the ones that have left, that kind of thing. So, we've done it. And by the way, we just feel like this is going to really be an advantage in the world of AI too, because put garbage into AI and you're going to get garbage answers out. Put really clean data in and you want to generate leads. You can generate leads yourself with AI and you get currency and really, solid stuff. So, it's, once again, it's about just doing the things right. And then obviously we have lots of services, by the way. I know I'm just talking about the data, but there's a lot of specialized ways that you need to reach out timing wise and consulting we can help with. We do email deployment, which is very tricky in the school market because of ransomware. They've all tightened up their security. And if you send too many emails into a school district at once, you'll get blacklisted or dropped. So it has to be done a very specific way. And HubSpot and Salesforce and these people don't like to do prospect email anyway. They give you a really hard time if you don't get a certain kind of open rates and things. So we've got a nice little business helping our customers reach things. We do programmatic digital ads through Trade Desk and StackAdapt and different things with proper audience segmentations and things. So anyway, we have a lot of different ways that we can help our customers empower the data and get more value out of it. But the data is the starting point and the core part of it. So
very cool. Yeah, I want to kind of take us back to this business now versus institution, right? Maybe you can talk us a little bit through this, but one of the things that just pops out to me on this slide is these institutions are recession resistant.
We during COVID and during the 2008 financial crisis and some of these other ones, when the stimulus money got, and there was ESSR, or whatever, money that came in through COVID. And then during the 2008, there was stimulus. They pushed all that through schools, county governments and things. It was about spurring broad spending across, the country. And one of the best ways to do that was to, give money into the school districts, get them to be buying more local products and things. And so it was one of the areas that helped, build out a recovery path for many businesses. So, schools in general, and districts, they're mission driven versus profit driven. And so, and they have a budget and it's a use it or lose it. The federal government will claw the money back if you don't go spend it. So they go on a spending spree at the end, and you can say that's wasteful or whatever, but it is stimulating the economy and there's always some needs, but it just operates very differently from a business. Now, bigger contracts or bigger needs require, proposals and requests for quotes, and they got to get 3 bids and lots of different things. So there's plenty of rules and regulations about some of this stuff, but the opportunities are pretty broad based and significant. They are very recession resistant. There's a diagram that we maybe can throw up here in a little bit, but schools are funded by local tax dollars, by state money, and by federal money. And a lot of people think that most of the money comes from the federal government. A very, very, very small amount of money comes from the federal government. And it's compensatory, meaning if you're a super poor district, you get a little bit extra money with Title I and some of these other things. Yeah, this is good. So you can kind of see the chart is, all the school districts rank from the poorest school districts to the wealthiest, and then the per pupil expenditure levels. It's actually quite a bit more dramatic in the top 10% and lowest 10%. It drops off like a cliff and goes up like a spike on the very end. It goes to the 20th, but the local tax money is your property taxes and everything like that. That's very, the schools are able to use that money without a lot of strings attached. State money is the next best thing, although sometimes there are some restrictions or hoops or things they have to do. The federal money tends to be the most difficult. You have to fill in applications at a school for Title I usage. You have to make sure your Title I grant money is only used for Title I kids. IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, is only used by, those kids, things like that. So, there's a lot of strings attached with the federal money. But the bottom line is the wealthier you are, the less dependent you are in terms of a school district. And, they're free to spend the money the way they see fit. And that they just keep pretty much any school bond or, tax increase across the country gets voted in by people. They want their schools to be good and strong, and I always say to people when they think, well, the budgets are going to be down this year and everything, I said, look, 50 million kids are going to show up on the doorstep, at the opening of school, and they're going to keep going. They spend. So you really don't want to pull back in a recessionary time very much. You can target a little bit and be smarter. If you want to tighten up your spending, you can drop off some of the smaller or poorer schools and put a little bit more effort into some of the wealthier areas that are still going to have money. But there is plenty of money out there in the school market. So
Yeah. I kind of want to go back to the data for a moment and just kind of explain why, back to like the example of the generalized B2B databases, right? This slide kind of tells a big story that 1 in every 7 public school teachers moves schools or leaves the profession every year. So, I want you to kind of walk us through why it's so important that you guys are updating this database constantly and how that's different from many of the other providers out there who may be providing lists. And back to that like whole, in both healthcare and education, if you're sending emails to people that aren't at these schools or these institutions, you will get blacklisted and you'll take yourself out of the running. So can you kind of like talk us through the change in the data and how you guys are able to stay in front of that and kind of be the leader in the freshest?
Yeah. So it's a great question. When you think of a school, first off, you have a school year, right? So most schools are closed during the summer. They have maybe summer school or whatever, but they're, slightly, definitely, reduced. So there's a very big seasonality to this. A lot of there's teacher unions, it's unionized things, there's contracts, lots of different rules and regulations. So it's a complex market. But, typically teachers do work out their entire school year. That, everything happens, people get sick, pregnant, take the leave. Like there's lots of different reasons why a teacher comes or goes, different types of things. But, over the summer, they're rehiring, retooling, and then, sort of the new school year launches and there's a whole new roster. And it's not just new hires. Teachers within a given building teach different subjects. My sister-in-law was a lead teacher up in New Hampshire for, 25 years. And, she taught 5th grade, 4th grade, they would move her around. She was the most experienced teacher, there. And when new teachers came in, they would work with her, shadow with her. Maybe if somebody left, she would take that class and do different things. So, they move around, their job functions change year to year. Many people, many educators in a particular building have multiple job functions. Just think of the football coach is the wrestling coach and also your algebra teacher or something like that. So there's 2 or 3 completely different job functions. So you got multiple job functions per person, sometimes at a school. You've got people sort of coming and going. You've got an interesting financial situation where there's a race. By the way, we have a school calendar, project that is very, very popular. It shows when schools open and close and where there's various vacations and things like that. And believe it or not, the back to school starts in late July. Mississippi, some of the schools in Mississippi, go back to school at the end of July. And then when you kind of go all the way up to New England, Massachusetts and stuff, they're not till the week after Labor Day, so, and I'm in Kansas City and most of our kids are back early August, the second week of August. So the flow of when kids come back into the schools and when schools are in session, runs an almost 2-month cycle. And then it's similar on the way out. We get out very early in Kansas City area. Our kids are out of school in early May. Graduation is typically like May 15th for high school. And, our family members that are in New England, they're not even out of school yet. I mean, it's June 24th. I think Friday is the last day of school for some of the things. So anyway, our kids have been home and doing everything else. So there is a lot of complexity. And on the compilation side, we do monitor the school websites. So as I was saying before, we're looking at 4 million educators every 30 days and making sure that they're still there. What's the job function? What new people have come in, changed all the different roles. And so that movement and validating the email addresses and things like you said, the blacklisting is really quite real. Um, and it's just very tight. Most of the schools use their school district IP. So if you're sending to a number of teachers, let's just say New York public schools, there's a million kids in New York public schools, and there's, a lot of schools. I should probably know off the top of my head exactly how many schools there are, but hundreds of them. And so you're talking about thousands of teachers. If you blast all of them all at once through the portal of New York school district, New York City public school district, they will pick up this repetition mail coming in. They will blacklist your IP address, and then you're out, and you're out for the entire city of New York, and so to do this right, you have to be very thoughtful, use, all the modern identification tools. There's lots of different standards that the players like Google and things now require, keys, identification keys, things like that. And then, randomizing your sending it over multiple days, dripping it in so you're not overwhelming inboxes and different things. And so all this is stuff that we do, but, sort of changing all of that and just keeping it super high quality. When if the people, like I was saying before, there's general B2B marketers. And so there's kind of people who you reach. And then of course there's very specialized educational marketers that may have an algebra book or something. Well, they want to go to algebra teachers. They don't want to go to all teachers. There's 4 million teachers, maybe only 10,000 algebra teachers, so the targeting and thing is critical. And I just will mention, sort of, one other thing, which is, we sort of talked a little bit about the timing and the decision making, but the traditional businesses tend to have purchasing decisions. It's usually made by higher ups in the organization. I do a lot of decision making, for our company about what we buy. But in education, teachers play an immense role in picking what the products are and stuff. And it's a little bit of a complex structure. So they will typically fill out an internal purchasing request for all the things they want for their classroom. They'll send it up and it'll go to a purchasing department and get ordered. But on the order form, you may have the purchasing person's name on there, but they're not picking your product. They're just following the orders of the teacher or the educator. So people make a mistake by using response files or things and saying, oh, well, I got all these purchasing agents at school districts and they're sending their literature to them, but they're not the ones calling the shots. The teacher decides what kind of markers they want to use and things. Now, there are certainly ways that they work to cut costs and group things together, and they may send edicts out saying, if we're going to buy paper, we're buying it from this place or things like that, commodity things. So it's complicated, but if you leave the teachers out of the equation, you're really making a mistake. And that's just not the case in the business world. You leave the line employees out. My line employees really don't make a lot of purchasing decisions. It's my managers and vice presidents and different things, So anyway.
So to get around that issue, what you're saying is you guys basically are accumulating data from over 80,000 institutions. You're updating it monthly at least, and you have segmentation of how many job titles did you mention again?
There's like 400 in schools. There's about 400 job titles, different kind of job titles. Everything from the marching band director.
Yeah. So that really gets the marketer to where they need to be able to get in front of the actual buyers and the influencers across the entire institution. That's cool.
And I will just say, we are the only person in the country that's doing this. I'm pretty sure. And I do a lot of homework against my competitors, and we have some good, high quality people in this space. So I am not a person that tries to throw my competition under the bus. We've worked collaboratively with many of them over the years. There are some fly-by-night players out there, but, there's some really good ones too. And, when they say annual updating, a lot of them mean that they're chugging away through the entire file over the course of a year. So when they say they're updating monthly, they are updating monthly. They're updating 1/12 of the database every month, and then they just go to another school. So on a 12-month cycle, they're going through their entire database, kind of once and sort of updating some things. When I say I'm updating monthly, I'm talking about going to 80,000 schools every month and updating 4 million teachers all in 1 month. That's 12 times a year. I'm completely updating the database from ground up, and nobody else is really doing that. Now, I will say there's 120,000 schools. So there are some schools that are too small. They don't even have a website. There are religious schools. There's Amish schools. There's like every kind of school you can think of out there. And there are some schools that do put things behind firewalls, like their faculty roster. You have to have a password or something to get to it. So it's not 100% universal that we can get everything that way. And we do work to get other things, the remaining schools out there, it's a little bit slower, process and more of an annualized kind of thing for the best that we can do through state licensing files and other kinds of methods. But the 4 million teachers that we educators, they're not all teachers, it's principals and administrative people and lots of other things. But the 4 million educators that we're doing on a monthly basis probably represents 80% of the entire universe. So we're kind of covering 80% of the universe every 30 days, basically. So
Wow.
there's nobody else doing that.
That's amazing. Well, I actually popped this slide up a bit earlier and it was a little out of order. But I think this is, if somebody's interested in selling to K through 12 schools, it's not like it's not like B2B marketing. If you send a mass email in late July or run a physical mail campaign, like you're literally wasting your money and your resources. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of buying calendar for schools?
Yeah, sure. And, this is where we can really help even the specialty people. One of the things that our approach allows people to do is to get into the schools a lot sooner. The traditional way of sort of updating it, we would phone verify a lot of this stuff in the old days, call the schools, kind of do things. And our competitors did some of that too. And, it would take many, many months to kind of get a good solid update going. And so you had catalog mailers and things that dropped in January, kind of thing. So that was you see that second half push January. But with this new way of compiling everything, we really have our file pristine in August. And if you're doing email and programmatic digital and everything, you can get into the markets a lot sooner. But basically, most schools have a June 30 year end. So they're resetting their budgets 1st of July, and they've got all this new money that they spend. They're creating a list of things that they want to buy prior to that. And then once the money gets, approved and released, and then they start the new school year, they start spending. And a lot of it, of course, is building things back up for back to school. You can imagine that a school that runs a full school cycle runs through a lot of products. Things are damaged, desks are damaged, musical instruments get stolen, this, that, and other thing. So there's a lot of replacement stuff that goes on, purchases, new things, new computers, new programs get launched, and that all gets started the first of the school year. Of course, you've got a big break at Christmas. So they're gone. Most schools are closed for 3-4 weeks during the holiday. This is a time that traditional businesses put the pedal to the metal with marketing because, the end of year spending is typically on the corporate side is when budgets are reset. I mean, our company is a 12/31 year end. So you get a lot of marketing and things like that. It's a terrible time to market to a school when everybody's out on vacation for a couple of months and they come back the second week of January. And then, the second part of the school year, the schools and districts are racing to spend the budgets that they've been allocated, because if they don't spend it, even local school boards and things will be like, well, I guess we don't need to get you any more money. You didn't even spend the money we gave you last year, whatever. So the use it or lose it is a very real thing. There's a big push. So, back to school, end of school year, the summertime is quiet. There's not much going on. I mean, there are summer schools and other programs, so it's not that the schools are completely closed, but it's not the greatest time. I'll just tell you our cycle. We do really well in August and September. We do quite well in December from a data buying. People are dropping in January, but they're buying from us kind of in December, and January is very strong. And then there's a little bit of cleanup, but late April, May and June when the schools are closed, we're sort of hemorrhaging money, if you will. Like, no one's placing orders, and then all of a sudden in July, everything starts to pick back up again. So, we see a very big, swing, but it's just very counterintuitive to a typical business, which tends to have, a lot of maybe more normal or steady eddy, activity, and at a big push at Christmas time or Christmas spending or end of year spending and that kind of stuff. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe we can kind of shift gears to back to the data. How do you guys deliver data today? What are some of the methods that customers are able to access your data via?
yeah, I'm just a big believer in trying to empower the users. From our standpoint, the more use cases you can put together for data use, the better off that is for us. So the traditional list, if you will, is kind of, we have not sent any printed list out in many years. So there is no such thing as a Cheshire label anymore, any of these other types of things, and even CD-ROM. So everything gets delivered electronically for the most part. We do have we're primarily a Microsoft shop. So we're an Azure environment, but we also do AWS. But we stand up private databases. We have over 100 private databases in the cloud. They're updated every single week. So our customers are getting data feeds of all the data that we're updating, changing real time. And then they use that for all sorts of things. They have APIs, connections into that feed solutions within their own companies. Some of them put them into CRM systems, some of them to lead generation or marketing things. We do have a platform called Datalocity, which is integrated into Salesforce.com and HubSpot. That actually puts a tab in your thing and it'll show you prospects and things in a separate tab within Salesforce.com or HubSpot. So, we produce things that way. And of course, we do programmatic digital audiences through LiveRamp and Trade Desk and, StackAdapt and different things like that for people to do program. And I think the need for branding in education is so important now. The catalog mailers have kind of gone away. We used to have just 100 catalog mailers that spent a lot. And, for the most part, people would order all their products through their catalog. The teachers they'd get a catalog, they put it in the secretary's office, they'd go in there, grab their catalogs and select all their products out of catalogs. Now, of course, it's websites, right? They go to the websites, they place the order through the websites. The catalogs kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. But you also are losing some of the branding. So with programmatic digital, you can put your brand out there specifically in front of a teacher and keep your top of mind, things, because, Google will sort you out. So are you sure that when a teacher is looking for a product that your website's going to get popped up on Google? Or do you want them to remember that you represent something specific and you want to make sure you're doing that? And of course, AI now does recommendations and things there too. So we've kind of getting into, a little bit that space. But in terms of specifically all the ways we deliver it, the Azure builds are very powerful. And this is where we see integrating our Azure builds into AI and letting people empower their own custom database, marketing database that they're getting from us with AI, where they can ask any kind of question in English and get, access to it and things. We don't have that all mainstream yet. It's something we're working on, but it will be up and running. We are going to do it and it's going to be up and running,
Yeah.
sometime.
And the work we're doing together, I mean, working to empower platform use cases, we're excited about, right? You guys are part of the SpringDB Data Exchange, and the InstaDB platform is a great way to access data through MCP or through high-powered APIs, or a user interface that can segment the data in any way and mold it and shape it and join it with other first and third party data sets. So it sounds like you have a multitude of ways to give customers access to your data. How about the commercial models that you guys work with? Is it a user license? Are you doing cost per record, unlimited data access? Can you tell us a little bit about the way you guys set up commercials for access to the data?
Yeah. Once again, this kind of goes back to my philosophy of how are all the ways that we can use the data to power different solutions, and can you price point things for different kinds of use cases. So, the most profitable use case for a customer of ours would be using contact data and emails to promote their products and make money off of it, right? Hey, buy my X, Y, and Z thing. And you're sending an email out to a teacher and they click on it and they buy something. And so you spend X with us and send a whole bunch of messages and you get, X times some sort of multiplying factor as your return on investment for selling. And, we've typically done that. It's always a price per thousand, type of thing. The more you're sending, the more you have to spend with us and everything. But we do work with, say, lots of different news organizations, even, schools of education, different things that want to use the data to do market research or articles. And in some cases, we can give them the entire database for free if they name us as a named contributor to help them do a research project or a study. We've worked with the federal government. We worked with the CDC during COVID. There was a lot of concern that schools were going to be super spreaders of COVID. The kids would go to school, they would get it, they'd bring it back home and kill their parents and grandparents and things like that. That actually turned out to not be the case. The younger you are, the more resistant you kind of were to COVID, and the elderly and more sickly people with diabetes and stuff were much more susceptible to harsh outcomes. There were very few cases of children that didn't have, at least had no underlying pre-existing health condition. Diabetes in particular was harsh with COVID, but we were working on a massive contract with the CDC to, use all this technology to update on a weekly basis, whether schools were in session, did they have COVID spread, lots of different things. So, we've worked with the big, I can't name them, but, if you go to a map somewhere out there through any of the map providers where a school is located, on the map and, what's inside the building, and that has come, largely through us. So that's, we call that a geo point. It's a geolocation of the data. We do work with pipeline mitigation companies, for example, that have to have a disaster plan. If a gas pipeline, leaks. And so schools, daycares, nursing homes, hospitals all need to be able to be notified, evacuated, and, within a certain corridor. So anyway, there are tons of different weird use cases that you would not think. And a lot of those are priced out, sort of differently, a little bit unique depending on what you want to do. And, you and I have been talking about how do we tokenize the data, with AI, charging via maybe a token or something. I don't have the answers to that, but that's where I'm putting my thinking cap on. So we are fairly inventive and pretty, competitive, and we're going to find a way. And I'm hoping that if we can really figure out a way to tokenize the data, you can get more data available to smaller players without them having to spend a fortune, but they just spend it based on the usage and utility kind of thing, depending on what they want to do. So more to come on that.
Absolutely. I think, that's the way this market is moving. And, we've had an amazing time with you today, Peter, talking about education data, the education market, when to sell, how to sell, what to sell. You've been incredibly helpful and provided amazing information. And we do plan on having you back to talk about your healthcare assets as well. So
Looking forward to it.
thank you.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.